Hello, everyone in construction land. Welcome to another episode of Constructive Conversation, your place for anything and everything construction related and a little bit more. This episode is brought to you again by the fine folks at Brown Edwards and Company, CPAs. Today we have a guest that is actually one of our clients, a longtime friend of folks in Brown Edwards. I know that he goes back with our construction practice leader for a while, Ed Stelter of Faulconer Construction. Ed, welcome to the show today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
That's not a problem. It's our pleasure. So, Ed, I want you to actually give us a little bit of background on yourself. You're currently Vice President of Business Development at Faulconer, but you also have a big background in AI and data, and also host your own construction podcast.
That's right. First and foremost, thank you so much for having me. It's kind of cool to be sharing this podcast with other folks like Dave Turing, Wally Adamczyk, Aaron Witt, and many others that you've had on here. So again, I'm flattered that I've been invited. So my construction journey, I started probably over 40 years ago. My dad had a wood shop. He was an agricultural chemist, traveled all over the Southeast primarily. My mother stayed at home with us, but nonetheless, during the weekends and whatnot, my father would be out in the shop building something. I always enjoyed that. Later on, I guess in high school, I ended up taking a job with the company Worth Builders in West Palm Beach, Florida, where I grew up. And basically, I was a laborer. And I I worked all summer there. And then after that, actually ended up working for a garage door company, hanging garage doors and servicing them, and operators as well, too. So just in and around construction for a while. I went off to college, community college, and then went to Appalachian State, graduated from there. Met my wife there many years ago. But when I got out of college, I landed in Virginia. I was trying to figure out what to do. I really enjoyed old homes. Historical restoration is what I really loved old homes. My grandparents had a house that was built in 1848 by James Madison's great nephew. And it actually joins Montpelier in Orange County, Virginia. And anyway, I just really had a passion about the craftsmanship and the character that went into these old homes. When I landed in Virginia, I ran across an ad in the newspaper back when we used to find jobs in newspapers and go on ads. And I started going to work for a guy named Charles McRaven Restorations. Basically, we were restoring old log homes, doing blacksmithing, timber frame, stonemasonry. It was a wonderful opportunity. Really loved what I was doing, but there really wasn't a whole lot of opportunity for career advancement. I was there for about 2 years and started looking around town and seeing a lot of pickup trucks with construction company names on the side of it, and ended up applying or shotgunning out a multitude of resumes. I spoke to a handful of people, ended up talking to Jack Sanford, the owner of the company here at Faulconer Construction. This is over 30 years ago. And anyway, he offered me a job on the spot. Said, "Can you start tomorrow?" I said, "No, I got to put in at least 2 weeks." So I ended up leaving McRaven Restorations, coming to work for Faulconer. They stuck me out in the field. I will say that that was probably the most valuable 2 years of my career here at Faulconer, was working out in the field and understanding what it took to do the work and understanding what different pieces of equipment were. And one of the funny stories I like to tell, the first job I was on was the Target Distribution Center in Stewart's Draft, Virginia. The building was about 40 acres under roof. So it was a tremendous building. And this is before all the distribution centers that they're building today and have in the recent past. But I remember we were grading a road and the superintendent got on the radio and said, "Hey, I need a pan over here. Bring me a pan." I didn't know what a pan was. I kept expecting a cookie sheet looking thing to come around, somebody bring a cookie sheet or a little pan around in a pickup truck and use it for what? I have no idea. Meanwhile, here comes a big old Caterpillar 621 piece of equipment that I've seen. I had no idea what it was called. But anyway, I learned that day that, okay, that's a pan or a scraper. So I continued to work out in the field. They ended up moving me to Charlottesville to another job, which was a lot closer to home. I was able to sleep an extra hour in the morning, as opposed to getting up at about 4 o'clock and driving over the mountain. But worked there for a while and moved over to a DOT project. And we had a particularly wet spring. And I went into the office and said, "Hey, I'd really like the opportunity to maybe work a little bit more, get more hours, because, when we were shut down, I wasn't getting paid." They ended up offering me on rainy days to come into the office and help out with estimating. So I started doing that. I enjoyed that. And At one point at Faulconer, we ended up kind of taking the cradle to grave approach where we ended up, if we bid the job, we also managed it. So I bid a number of jobs, which I also managed. That worked okay, but the problem was that if you were working on an estimate, you were kind of neglecting some operational things that needed your attention. And when you were dealing with managing your project, you would typically push or delay what you needed to be working on your estimate. So we ended up dividing departments apart, kind of an operations and an estimating. I ended up taking the role as chief estimator for the company and did that for quite a number of years. And one of my colleagues who's still here, David Galloway, he ended up leading kind of the operations side of leading the project managers. And that evolved into me really getting involved with a lot of business development related activities. I never until really earlier this year had the role of business development in my title. I've always been mostly attracted to or mostly enjoy the get work side of the business, developing the relationships, putting together a strategy for pursuing the work, putting together partnerships and trying to find the right subcontractors or engineers to pursue work. And that's just where my strengths were, hence the reason I was leading the estimating department. But come along a little bit later, we ended up really looking into design build work, and they ended up putting me in charge of trying to put together, I guess, innovative pursuits is what we called it. Did that for quite a while. Again, really enjoyed putting together teams and strategies for winning work that wasn't necessarily out on the street. In Virginia, they have what's called PPEA and PPTA legislation that allow firms to submit proposals unsolicited to localities. And we put together a number of those, and we're still continuing to do those, but they've been really successful for us. It's a lot of work, a lot of risk, but it's a lot of fun also, assuming they go well. And then about 3 or 4 years ago, we had a new president, Steve Bowers, come on board, and I was talking to him about a lot of the challenges we're having with regards to our data and how it's not exactly accurate. And there's a lot of very disparate sources. Things weren't connecting. So just kind of chirping in his ear over time, approached me and said, "Hey, would you be willing to try to take on, our data strategy and see what you could do with that?" I did for about the past 3 years, which was incredibly rewarding. I learned a ton. There's a lot of disconnected sources. So there's a lot of integrity related issues, and it's kind of not necessarily anybody's fault, but it's everybody's fault. I think, when you have humans entering information, there's a lot of opportunity for errors. When you have telematics bringing in information, the integrity is pretty good. Not, I wouldn't say quite perfect, but it's pretty daggone good. Anyway, I worked on that for a long time. I did get to see across the spectrum of all of our businesses, and really a lot of our data become incredibly transparent to me. And the information basically within a click or two is available to many of our people now. It was, again, really rewarding to do that. But in the meantime, they ended up moving me back into business development. We are getting a few different software, changing a few different software platforms out as kind of a wholesale change. So we're looking at our overall data strategy. So for right now, from as of earlier this year, I've really taken on the role of vice president of business development. And again, back to my strengths of building relationships and putting together teams. So that's where I am today.
Sounds like you've hit the entire spectrum of working there at Faulconer. I agree with you. It's working out in the field those first couple of years is probably some of the best experience that you could have had. I remember working construction when I was in college, working construction jobs, getting an understanding of how things worked, and really not understanding it at the time. But as I've gotten into working with contractors, over the last 27 years in public accounting, just things that I look back on in my years in the field just click and make more sense. But definitely makes you a Swiss Army knife of sorts there at Faulconer with all the experience that you have in every facet.
Well, there's a lot of things I don't know. I'm continuing to learn every day. The men and women out in the field that make the work happen, and essentially I owe it all to them. I can't sell this company if they're not out there performing and doing what they do best.
And if someone ever says they need a pan, you know what they're talking about now.
Exactly, I do now.
So I mentioned earlier that you had a relationship with our construction practice leader, Billy Robinson.
Mhm.
How did Billy end up meeting?
Gosh, I don't know. I've always been very involved with a lot of trade organizations. Most recently, I just rotated off the board of the Virginia Transportation Construction Alliance, where I served as president, which actually about 24 years ago, the president of or the owner of our company, Jack Sanford, was also president of the Road Builders Association. I've been involved with the AGC of Virginia. I've been involved with different economic development organizations. I was the founding president of the DVIA Central Virginia chapter, the whole alphabet soup. But through those, I've met a lot of great people and formed a lot of fantastic friendships. I couldn't tell you where I first met Billy, but it was probably he was doing a presentation and probably listened to it and I liked it. And anyway, I probably had a question or two because that was kind of one of my strategies around when I was newer into the industry and trying to learn and meet people. I would always try to think of a question to ask during these presentations, raise my hand, stand up, introduce myself, and then ask the question. So I don't know. Again, I'm always thirsty to learn more, and Billy's always done a great job with some of these presentations.
Well, he's always spoke highly of you. And in fact, when I brought this idea of having constructive conversations as a podcast to him in the firm, you were the first person that he mentioned. He said, you need to go out and listen to Ed Stelter's podcast, Foundation Podcast, because he's doing something like what you're talking about wanting to do. And yeah, so I won't say that you were my inspiration because I didn't know about you at the time, but you're definitely one of the building blocks that I tried to build this podcast up on. But I'm sure like I have, you've met all kinds of fascinating people and companies
Absolutely.
throughout all the podcasts that you've done. How long have you been doing the podcast?
I think it was the beginning of 2022 was when I started the first one. I have my day job. I would love to spend more time recording and capturing the stories. So my podcast is Foundations Podcast. It's about the history and stories behind the companies that built the buildings that put into place the infrastructure we use every day. And essentially, there's a couple podcasts that I listen to. One is How I Built This, and they tell stories about, or they basically interview founders and owners of different companies. Could be technology company, could be a food company, a beverage company, clothing companies, technology companies, hospitality. I mean, you name it, all types of companies. But I always became a little bit of a fanboy every time I listened to these podcasts of the company of the folks that they were interviewing, because you get to hear the story behind how they were created and kind of understand their why and the grind and hustle that went into their success. You do look at a lot of these companies and they're incredibly successful today, but you don't really know the backstory. And I always thought it'd be cool to do like How I Built Virginia. And there were a couple a couple folks that I thought about. One being Jack Sanford Sr., who when I started, Jack Sanford, who owns the company now, his father was here at the time I started the company, but he was a Virginia gentleman. Just loved hearing the stories about what he's done and what he's doing. And then let's see, Sterling Williamson with S.O. Williamson, I believe they're one of your clients. But he's an older gentleman in the industry. Jack Horn with Martin Horn. Well, Jack Horn ended up dying before I ever got to capture his story. And he was one of the guys that was always on my list. If I ever did this, that's going to be somebody I interview. Well, he passed away. So I started thinking about it. I ended up talking to my wife, said, what do you think? I've had this idea in my head for a while. She's like, go for it, do it. So the next thing I did, I went by and I stopped by Martin Horn's office and talked to Doug Horn, the son of Jack Horn. And I can't remember if one of his brothers was there, Jack or Ted, and then I also went by to see Blair Williamson with S.O. Williamson and asked her about the idea if she'd be willing for me to interview them and do this podcast. They both said yes. So the first one I did was S.O. Williamson. She didn't really know what to expect. I didn't know what to expect. I just did it. I didn't talk about it a whole lot with anybody. I just went ahead and did it. One of the things that was a big kickstart for me, or that helped me, I guess, start out on the right foot, is because, as you probably know, as you're looking and researching how to do podcasts, you're overwhelmed with everybody's opinions, what to do, what platforms, what recording equipment, whatever. There's a podcast I love, Millhouse Podcast. They interview a lot of fishing guys, Andy Mill and Nikki Mill. It's a father-son duo. They go out and interview a bunch of young and crusty old fishing guides. Love the stories. I ended up reaching out to them, and Nikki Mill was gracious to reach out to me and basically told me what to do, what works for them, what recording equipment. I ended up getting some of that, did a little bit of modifications. Now, I don't do video, so that makes things a little bit easier, but I ended up getting all that, as I mentioned, recording S.O. Williamson, putting it out there. I think it was the first of 2022, and just went from there. My goal was originally to do about 6 episodes a year. I can't say that I've hit that. First year was pretty decent. I've done, off the top of my head, I've done S.O. Williamson, I did Litchfield, Cedar Mountain Stone, and Chemung Contracting. I actually did Charles McRaven, the guy that I used to work for, restoring old log homes. I've done Barnhill, Harmon Construction, Oregon, Shirley Contracting, Luckstone, the Luck companies, including Luckstone, Lee Construction Group, Wayne Brothers, Swagman, MEB, SB Cox, forgetting a few, Sussex Development, which I actually recently did. The one thing I didn't do, I never had an episode 13. As you know, a lot of buildings you get into, there's no 13th floor. Triskaidekaphobia, I'm probably pronouncing that a little bit wrong, but it's the irrational fear of the number 13. But I intentionally just kind of set aside the number 13 and called it Triskaidekaphobia Partners and put a little thing about the number 13 and the superstition around that. So, but I want to say to date, I've done 19 episodes or so.
Yeah, that's excellent. Yeah, somebody told me on one of the podcasts we recorded that I guess if you make it past a year, or maybe it's not even a year, you're like in the top 35% of successful podcasts. Like most of them don't make it past so many months. So,
well, congratulations to you. You've done a great job, and you've been really disciplined about doing it. So
you also, yeah, we're successful podcasters, I guess.
I guess so.
I tell everybody that, and I've said it on here before, I'm a professional CPA, not a professional podcaster, but it's good to get the stories out there. And you've told a lot of stories on all of your podcasts. One phrase I like to use is white whisker wisdom. And the way that generations learn is from the older generation.
Right.
And all of the podcasts that you put out it's invaluable wisdom that you've passed on through your podcasts to the next generations.
Absolutely. The stories that these guys tell, and again, the grind and hustle is pretty remarkable. I don't know if I mentioned Lanford Brothers, but just hearing their story, how they got started. And actually, one of the episodes I did was Nello Tier. Nello Tier is no longer in business, like it's a construction company. But at one point, they were doing work worldwide. I was fortunate to sit down with the grandson of Nello Tier. But just to put this in perspective, at one point, they did a $450 million Air Force base in Israel. And I'm telling you, it would blow your mind. And this guy, Nello Tier, he started out with a team of mules. He lost his hand I believe it was a brick manufacturer plant, and he lost it. And so he ended up saying, okay, I got to do something to earn money. So he rented or borrowed a team of mules from a relative, I believe. I might have the story a little bit mixed up. You can go listen to it, but because it's been a while. But he started and with a team of mules, and they actually built, I want to say, 17 sections of the Blue Ridge Parkway. And work wasn't easy back then. But again, it's the grind and the hustle that all these folks they stick with it, they persevere, and the success that they've been able to achieve is remarkable.
So, when you've talked with all of these different construction companies, what have been some of the similar traits of successful firms? What do you see as a commonality of what makes people successful in this business?
The people they surround themselves with, without a doubt. I think at Barnhill, they talk about family is so important, and I've talked to a lot of people that have worked or work at Barnhill, and they're like, this is very legitimate. And there's just a family feel there. And you hear about how Mr. Barnhill, when he would go out on the job site, he would ask everybody about, how their family's doing, he'd call their, wives by name and the children by name. He knew everybody, knew who they were, what their interests were, knew their family. I know, like Lee Construction Group, they just talk about how Arlene Lee was talking about how important people were. Sussex Development, who I recently did, I actually interviewed them live at the AGC Winter Convention. But Harry and Raleigh Davis, Harry and Raleigh kept reiterating over and over again. He said, it's because of that people we have here working for us, the excellence they deliver every day. I think about Litchfield, and how they had some key relationships that were able to take them far. And Mark Horrigan, I mean, you name it's the people that they've surrounded themselves with weren't necessarily working for them, but they had a close alliance with them. And a lot of people do say their accounting partners, their banking partners, and their legal partners as well too.
It definitely takes a team.
Absolutely.
I had one gentleman that had worked his way up through estimating and project management and into a officer role. And the owners were at the point where they wanted to sell, and they worked out a purchase plan with this gentleman. And the first thing he asked me, as being his accountant for their audited financial statements, he looked at me kind of like deer in the headlight look. He's like, "What do I do now?" And I told him, surround yourself with good people. I said, they'll help tell you things that you don't know. You need a good CPA, you need a good project manager, you need a good insurance person, so on and so forth. But not many firms are successful just riding solo.
That's for sure.
So in all of your podcasts, your episodes, do you have a hit list of guests that you're working on getting? And if you do, who is at the top of the list?
Oh, there's a lot of them. I have not done Faulconer Construction yet.
Yeah.
Interestingly. That's right. Now, just trying to coordinate schedules and all that. And anyway, just again, I have a day job. Unfortunately, I can't do as many of these as I'd love to. It is a lot of fun, and I'm so richly rewarded for every one I do, and the wisdom that I gain from these conversations with these folks is wonderful. I will say that my oldest son, he's actually working for Gilbane down in Tampa, and I would love to do Gilbane. One of the reasons he got interested in construction was I did not make him listen to the podcast, but he started listening to the podcast on his own and started saying, "Okay, it's pretty cool." I mean, I like where these folks have taken themselves and what they've done, and I think that really sparked an interest in construction industry. Now, I've dragged him around to some of these conferences that we've been to, and when they've been more family oriented. So he's somewhat been around it, but he's never worked a day in construction other than in our yard around our house. But he never worked a day in construction until he got this job with Gilbane. So they're certainly on the top of my list. There's quite a number of other folks around the country that would be interesting to talk to. But again, it takes either a long drive or a flight that would be interesting to hear their story. And there's been a handful of people, and I'm not going to mention any names, that I would love to do, but for various reasons, they would rather keep things kind of on the private side, which I totally respect. And one of my deals is when I talk to these people, I tell them, we're going to sit down and record it, and I record it. And before I publish it, I send it over to them for their approval. And if they decide at the end of the day they don't want it aired, I will totally respect that. Fortunately, I've never had to do that yet.
Same. So. Yeah, definitely want the guests to have creative control over what gets put out there. And I feel that way too, especially since I let the guests do most of the talking. It's more their podcast than it is mine or ours here around Edwards. I listened to the last podcast with Sussex Development. I thought it was really, really neat that you did that one live in front of an audience at the AGC Virginia conference.
Yeah.
So where do people find your podcast? Just on any podcast platform, or is there any place in particular? I found it on Apple's podcast.
Yeah, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon. My website is foundations-podcast.com. So all the episodes are on there with links to the shows. And you can listen through the player on that platform as well too. But I'm just trying to add to them. I have one actually that's been done since towards the beginning of the year and ready to go. But I just need pictures from folks that I interviewed. I'm just waiting on that. And once I get that done, I can hit publish. So I'm looking forward to releasing that one. That's a cool story as well too. They're all cool stories. A couple of people have asked me which ones are my favorite. It's like, which is your favorite child? It's impossible. They're all great stories, amazing stories.
Yeah, that Sussex was a great story, and I look forward to going back and listening to more of them. Like I say, you learn so much about the industry and about the history and successes and failures from listening to those stories.
Absolutely. I do think I'm of course enjoying working here, but I do think had I heard some of these stories when I was in my younger 30s, I may have taken the gamble and might have started my own company. So I'm very risk averse, unfortunately.
Yeah, I can understand. I went to Vegas for a conference and I took $20 to bet with, bet it on like at the roulette table, walked away a loser. I was done.
I'm Vegas. Just not my cup of tea.
So there you all have it. This wraps up another episode of Constructive Conversations. Be sure to watch this podcast on YouTube or listen to it wherever you get your podcasts. Until the next time, keep building, America.